Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content and $7 Productions. February 6, 1971. Frau Morrow, the moon. For astronaut Alan Shepard, this scene is a victory a lifetime in the making. He is no mere tourist here. He's a veteran who survived the anti-aircraft hell of Okinawa and returned a war hero. He's a member of the original Mercury 7, the man who risked everything to be the first American in space. And for nearly a decade, he was grounded. Grounded by a disease that tried to steal his balance, his career, and his hearing. But he fought back, won his way back to the flight deck. He is, in this moment, at age 47, the only member of the original Mercury 7 to make it to the moon. He's completed his scientific sampling, collected the rocks. Now he stands before the TV camera, facing the vastness of the lunar surface. He reaches into a deep pocket of his bulky suit. He pulls out a small metallic object, and with an easy, almost casual motion, he screws it onto the end of his lunar geological sampler. Then he produces two little white spheres. He drops one onto the silver dust. He raises the makeshift club with one hand. 10 years of grinding discipline, military mastery, and sheer competitive rage, all building to this single, utterly ridiculous moment. A transmission cuts the silence from Mission Control at Houston. A voice full of tension and disbelief.
Al, you're running short on time. Better wrap it up, Commander.
Commander Shepard responds.
Houston, you might recognize what I have in my hand as the handle for the contingency sample return. It just happens to have a genuine 6-iron on the bottom of it. In my left hand, I have a little white pellet that's familiar to millions of Americans.
Alan Shepard is about to hit a golf ball on the surface of the moon. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week, the show where we tell the badass history of badasses. I am joined today by that's a new thing I've been doing.
It's succinct, it's straight to the point.
Yeah, you know, when they were first, well, let's introduce Brandon Fibbs is here with us today. He's a writer, director, producer, former Navy air crewman. Did I get that right?
Yep, you did.
Yes. And so, when they were trying to pitch the Badass book for the first one, my agent was like, he's like, I'm trying to sell 2 books right now. One is like this really complicated, hard, like in-depth history of some like very dark and tricky things to deal with. He's like, and then I can call up other people and just be like, hey, it's a badass history of badasses. What do you think?
It is a perfect selling point.
Yes,
you're not confused as to what you're getting.
You know where you're here. And so what are people here for today, Brandon? Brandon comes on to do you've come on repeatedly to do space heroes and aviators and occasionally pirates, but usually space.
I have a lane, apparently. It's a very creative lane, yeah. Space and pirates.
Yes.
And we've done some night witches. Well, I guess that's still aviation. So yeah, you're right. Aviation and space figures into a lot of these, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we're kind of dealing with that, not pirates today, but aviation and space coming together for a character that we're going to talk about today, who is Commander Alan Shepard, the first American in space.
Yeah, Alan Shepard. Alan Shepard, who for a lot of us of a certain generation discovered him on the right stuff. Like I have so many memories for some of like the early Mercury flyers that are rooted in. Obviously, not all of that's historically accurate, but that's like kind of like the baseline that so many of us have for so many of these guys.
I was going to make that joke because I feel like every time you come on the show, we end up referencing that movie.
It's not a bad movie. It is in my pantheon of the best American movies ever made. So that's okay.
I agree. It is for me as well. So we are going to talk today about Alan Shepard. And, interestingly, even though, the more I kind of got into researching him, the more I realized that he's kind of central to the entire space program, entire U.S. space program throughout the Cold War, the space race. And, a lot of times when you think about American space pioneers, you start to think about guys like John Glenn and Neil Armstrong. And I feel like Alan Shepard's name doesn't always come up at the top of that list. And I think after we talk about him today, hopefully we can change that a little bit, because I think that he was kind of like the best of the best to begin with. And then he's central to the entire process throughout all of the space program. And, having him be a guy who was the first American in space and also returns and the only member of the Mercury 7 to land on the moon.
Right.
I mean, that's like he was there for the whole thing, right?
Yeah. I think in the grand sweep of things, I think people like John Glenn and others who were, to simplify this a lot, who were much more quote unquote lovable and accessible, is a reason some of their stories have persisted in ways that his haven't, despite the fact that he was, as you said, the first American in space. I think his, he was known as this icy cold demeanor and stuff like that. And his philandering and some other things, I think, kind of made people stand off, hold him at a little bit of an arm's length at times. And while we can certainly talk about those things that make people imperfect, as are we all, it certainly doesn't detract from the things that he did that make him a genuine badass.
Right. This isn't like perfect person of the week.
No,
I find there's not always a lot of like crossover.
It doesn't have the same thing. Like when you want to pitch a book or a podcast, this is the not perfect people podcast. That's not the same as badass.
Yes. This is the history of role models throughout history. No, I mean, he is, the picture I always think of with Alan Shepard, and the one that, like, if I was going to do the website article, the lead image would be that picture of him right after the takeoff of Gemini 7. He's wearing, like, he's Capcom, he's sitting in mission control, he's smoking his big fat cigar, and he's wearing like his astronaut uniform, and he's in mission control. And I'm just like, this is cool. I need to know more about this guy.
Yes.
Who is this? It's like that picture of like Len Dawson smoking the cigarette at halftime of the Super Bowl, right? He's just like, well, yeah, let's light this up in mission control.
Yep. He has lots of memorable moments. As you said before we started recording, it's one of those things that you start researching people for these conversations. And the more research you do, the more you realize, oh, there's so many cool little stories here. Some of them just tiny little tidbits, but those tidbits are the things you remember.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I always think about that picture, and this is the kind of guy we're talking about. He's not like he does not go on to be a senator and shake hands and be a politician. He not that I have anything against John Glenn. John Glenn's awesome. This is just a different kind of guy, and they're not, even though they're both pioneering astronauts, they're wildly different people and different personalities. And like you said, I think Alan Shepard did rub some people the wrong way because he was a I don't know, badasses rub people the wrong way.
Yeah, that's true. People who make history are rarely simple and uncomplicated and, even, dare I say, beloved. They generally, if you do extraordinary things, you kind of occasionally have to stomp on some feet and toes and things on your way.
I feel like it's inevitable sometimes, yeah. Even I know people who don't make history and they still do that.
That's true, too. But we're not talking about them. They don't have the podcast.
Yes. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to tell the story of Alan Shepard, the first American in space. So please stick with us. All right, welcome back to Badass of the Week. We are here with Brandon Fibbs, and we are going to talk about Alan Shepard. So Alan Shepard was born in 1923 in East Derry, New Hampshire. He went to the U.S. Naval Academy and graduated in 1944, and then he was deployed to the Pacific Theater in World War II, where he served aboard a destroyer called the USS Cogswell. Now, the Cogswell was a radar picket. He was in Leyte, like he's there in 1944. So, Brandon, this is kind of like the middle of the height of the Pacific War.
Pacific War, yeah.
So he's there with, he's at Leyte, he's at Luzon, and he's stationed at Okinawa for a year during the Battle of Okinawa. and his detail, he was the commander he was the gunnery officer responsible for the ship's anti-aircraft guns, which was a very dangerous job.
At that time, with the kamikaze pilots, it was a critical job.
Yes. So the Cogswell, it's a destroyer. It's a radar picket that kind of is on the outskirts of the fleet, trying to warn about incoming fleet and aircraft. But those radar pickets were kind of, because they were the early warning eyes and ears of the fleet, they were a prime target for kamikazes, which were, I guess, just to explain that's like a airplane full of explosives that just flew directly into warships and tried to sink them. And so this is a pretty stressful job, I feel like, being a radar picket at Okinawa, gunnery officer for a radar picket at Okinawa for a year. But Shepard served there, and he served with distinction, and the Cogswell made it through, shot down several kamikazes during the course of the campaign. And Shepard was on board Cogswell when it was in Tokyo Bay for the official surrender of Japan in September 1945.
That's right. You know what? It's something I found fascinating in my research for this, and something I didn't, which is not the case anymore in the Navy, but all aviators who before they went to that training had to spend time at sea on a cruiser or a destroyer or something like that. Their pipeline didn't take them directly into flight training, which I thought was really fascinating. Like I said, it's not something the Navy does now. If you go through aviation, that's your pipeline from day one. But it was very interesting that they first required them to spend time at sea in a non-aviation job. So that's why Alan Shepard, this amazing aviator, first found himself at sea trying to stop kamikaze attacks, and then found himself, as you mentioned, in Tokyo Bay for the Japanese surrender.
Right. And then after that, he does get into aviation, and he goes into, and he picks, like, because the war's over, he's like, well, what's the most dangerous thing I can do in peacetime? How about Navy test pilot school?
Well, and so forgive me, I think you're kind of getting ahead of some cool stuff, because even when he was a kid, some of the things that I found fascinating is, here's this guy, he comes from a one-room schoolhouse. And he was such a good student that he skipped both 6th and 8th grades. Which was amazing for him, ending school so early. But he was accepted to the U.S. Naval Academy after graduation. But because he'd skipped those grades, they didn't allow him to join the Navy yet. They didn't allow him to join the academy because he was just too young. He would have been like 16 years old or something like that. So they said no. So he sent him to this prep school instead. He kind of had some introduction to the Navy, via prep school before actually going to the Naval Academy. And I just thought that was a very interesting thing too. You have this guy who's so bright that he's just skipping all of these classes. And then ironically, when he does go to the Naval Academy, he struggled with a great many things. And even when he goes into his naval aviation training, as you're talking about, which he started in 46, he was struggling. Like, we're so used to hearing these stories of these amazing professionals and badasses who just waltz in like a Neil Armstrong and they are the best pilot that's ever walked through the door. He becomes that, but he didn't walk in like that. And I thought it was really interesting that, as he's trying to go through his naval aviation training and finally gets that start, he was almost kicked out and had to get his civilian lesson on the sides, something the Navy frowned on and stuff like that. But, by the time he graduated, he had perfect grades. But I just thought it was very interesting. It's a good lesson for all of us that, these badasses don't necessarily just, aren't flying high from day one and everything's easy for them. Sometimes it was a lot of work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's something that's going to continually come up for Alan Shepard, that he is going to kind of force his way into the top of the class through hard work and
sheer will and brute force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's kind of what makes him who he is. And, he applies that to pilot school as well. And he applies that to getting into the cockpits of some very new aircraft. He's starting to fly jets, which are pretty new around the time that he's test piloting them. And it's like, okay, let's just strap a rocket to this thing and let's see how fast it can go.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because he's not only, you're absolutely right, he's testing jets, which are, today, they're everywhere. But at this time, things without propellers were still very new. This is 1950 when he starts test pilot school. So like jets are brand new. And then, you think also of the things that we take for granted now. But like a lot of the high risk work he did was in in-flight refueling tests, which, that's a common thing. But somebody had to be the first person to kind of, plug in and try to, start refueling. Somebody had the first person to land a jet on an aircraft carrier and test that. Like, we're talking phenomenally dangerous things that today are phenomenally dangerous, but are still routine. And he's inventing them on the spot.
Right. One of those things where you think, okay, well, I'll land this jet on the aircraft carrier, and then you do it, and you're like, actually, we should install tow cables. We should install hooks so that you can hook the thing on.
Oh, man. Yeah.
That would have made that a lot easier. Like you said, the stuff is still dangerous. And at the time, he's flight testing the Banshee, he's flight testing the Crusader, and the technology is not what it is today.
No. And he's the one, like, there was one airframe that the Navy had adopted that I can't remember the aircraft, but he was like, this one sucks, guys. And based on his recommendation, and I'm sure some recommendations of others, the Navy ditched the aircraft and went with a different one. But it just goes to show the power of a test pilot to be able to say, hey, this one works, this one doesn't. Like, make these improvements or let's ditch this airframe.
Right. And that's a good point, because that is something that you learn at test pilot school. It's not just about how to fly dangerous aircraft. It's how to repair them on the fly or figure out what's going on with them, figure out what's wrong with them. It's stuff that's going to really benefit Shepard in his career as an astronaut and as a capsule commander and things like that in the future. But this is something that they train you for in test pilot school, is like, we are going to fly this experimental airframe, and things are going to go wrong. Inevitably, things are going to go wrong. Yeah. Whether it's like, we need to tighten this, you need to get out a screwdriver and tighten this thing while you're flying at Mach 1, or whether it's like, something very, very bad has gone wrong and you need to diagnose, like, how dangerous is it going to be for me to try to land this, or should I just eject?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. We're so used to, there goes that F-18 over there. There goes that, that F-21. All of those aircraft at one time were experimental aircraft that test pilots were working on. And, and it wasn't until they had gone through a full battery of tests with people like Shepard at the helm that, they said, yes, this is good to go. Let's make a lot of these and shovel them out to the fleet.
Right. And this is the kind of training that when the United States begins the space program, this is the kind of people that they're looking for. These guys are basically engineers and pilots, and they're brave, and they're like, they have to have this kind of iron will, iron nerve to do this really experimental stuff. So you were talking about the right stuff. And when Project Mercury begins in 1959, they need to find astronauts. And Alan Shepard, because he's a hard worker, because he's been very efficient at this job of being a test pilot, he's selected as one of the 7 guys to be part of the Mercury program.
That's right. And I think also this makes me think that whoever wrote Top Gun studied a little bit of Alan Shepard in his life, because there's also that X factor that I think a lot of the early pilots had, and that was a certain amount of risk and a certain amount of just dangerous living that was necessary to take on jobs like this. He was talking about how he was nearly court-martialed for making low passes under bridges and flying over beaches and just blasting, taking his plane right over people on the beach. He got in a lot of trouble, but it's the kind of thing that, what's that bumper sticker that you always see about good, well-behaved women rarely make history? It's kind of the same, in this context too. Like, well-behaved rule followers are rarely the ones picked to be astronauts. And I thought, during this, and I know that we're moving into Mercury 7 here, but like, I just found myself thinking as we were doing the research on this, that it's only with hindsight, like, we look back on NASA right now from our vantage point in history and our age, and we're able to say, oh my God, what an amazing organization. Look what these people did. Look how extraordinary these people were. Look how extraordinary these rockets and these machines are. Look how extraordinary these missions are. But if you're Mercury 7, you have no idea if this is going to work. And especially, you're going to sit on top of a missile and hope it doesn't blow up and hope it puts you where it's supposed to put you. Like, a lot of these guys, their bravery is extraordinary. It's ludicrous because they are there's nobody who did this before them. They are literally the cutting edge, the tip of the spear. And I think it's, an important thing to remember as we talk about Shepard going forward is that this guy is doing something nobody has done before, except, obviously some Russians across the pond.
Right. Yes. And that's an important thing to mention because we are in, 1961, the Mercury program is going, and the idea is we're going to put a person into outer space. And at this time, the Soviet Union is also trying to do this. And the Soviets beat us to it, or beat the United States to it, in April 1961, when Yuri Gagarin completes the first orbital flight. And the Soviet Union is in space before the United States. They beat us on Sputnik, and now they've beaten us to have the first guy in outer space. This is kind of embarrassing for the U.S., and they need to step up their game. But to your point, this is not like the U.S. hasn't put a guy up there because they're not ready to do this yet. So there is this kind of string around this time of the U.S. trying to put rockets into outer space. And as you mentioned, I really think that this is such an important thing to talk about with the space program. These rockets were not designed originally to put a guy in outer space. They were designed to deliver nuclear warheads to Moscow. They were like, what if we just took the nuke off the top, take the nuclear warhead off the top and put like a cockpit up there and just launch that guy up in outer space and see what happens?
More or less exactly what they did. Yeah, so, and I love the fact that one of the very first things that Shepard did back in, I think it was 1959, they all went to watch one of those first rocket launches. And as is captured so hilariously in The Right Stuff, this rocket explodes just after blast off. It lifts off and it blows to pieces. And Shepard turns to John Glenn and he's like, well, I'm glad they got that out of the way. But of course, they didn't get that out of the way.
No, they did not.
The next one and the next one, the next one, the next one. They all blew up. It's what I'm always telling people when something goes wrong with a SpaceX flight or something like that, and they're like, oh, look at the Starship. It's failed again. I was like, do you know how many of those things NASA blew up before they ever put Alan Shepard into space? This is how it goes. Rocket science is hard. That's the reason we have that phrase.
Yeah, exactly. There's the video of you can watch this one on YouTube because it was filmed, right? The rocket takes off, it lifts 4 inches off the ground, it lands back down, the parachute ejects, and then the thing explodes. Yes. And you're like, well, you're up, Alan, get in there.
Yeah, right?
And so he does. They strap him onto the top of one of these rockets that up until now have been exploding more frequently than not. And in May of 1961, which is just a couple of weeks after Yuri Gagarin, he's strapped on to the top of Freedom 7. And he is, he's sitting there and he's waiting for them to launch the rocket. And there are technical difficulties while he's sitting there on the launch pad. Now, I'm kind of an anxious person, Brandon. And so having watched several rockets explode, personally stand there watching rockets explode, I'm strapped into the thing. I've been sitting there for 4 hours. Guys on the headset yeah, we got a little bit of a technical issue. When they come on the speaker on an airplane and tell me that they haven't got the drinks refreshed and we can't take off yet, I'm like, shoot, they're missing a piece of the plane. We're all going to die if we take off right now. They're telling us it's the drink cart, but it's there's some important piece of avionics that is failing on them and we're all in big trouble. But he doesn't react that way.
He doesn't react that way. Obviously he had time there to sit. Like you said, he's sitting there. Obviously, all of these things are running through his mind. I'm sure he's thinking about, everything going back to Gagarin beating him just less than a month earlier. I think a lot of people forget that Alan Shepard, his flight was delayed 6 separate times. He would have easily beaten Gagarin into space had it not been for the fact that it was just delay after delay after delay because of
so upset about it too. He was so mad about it when he heard about Gagarin and getting him to space.
He slams his fist on the table so hard that the flight surgeon thought he'd broken his hand. Yeah. And it's kind of fitting, though, because I love the story about when he told his wife that he'd been chosen to be the first human in space. She looked at him, and this is before Gagarin did it. She looks at him and she says, "Who let a Russian in here?" Which of course speaks to the fact that up to this point, And honestly, up to the moon, basically, the Russians beat the Americans in just about every single space race hurdle there was. And even then, like in the early 60s, it was very clear that the Russians and not the Americans were winning this race. And so I'm sure as he sat there on that rocket, thinking that the Russians had already beat him and all this stuff, and then is he just going to blow up in this pad? That had to have been the sorts of things that's going on in his mind. And of course, and I'm sure you're driving to this, the fact that he'd been sitting there so long, he really had to pee.
Yes. Yeah, so he did have to. Yeah, there's a story about that where they're just like, he's like, get me out of this. I'm gonna pee. Like, if we're not gonna do this, and they're like, just go in your suit, like whatever. So that starts a grand tradition of astronauts unceremoniously pee in their pants because there's no bathroom facility or anything on a Mercury or Gemini.
Well, I love that nobody thought about that. Again, nobody's done this before, so nobody thought, hey, we should probably attach a little catheter and put it in his spacesuit just in case there's a delay. Nobody thought about that. They just assumed we put him in, we have a launch, off he goes, he comes back, and obviously every future suit was given urine bags, after that because he had to pee in his own suit. But that, for me, there's a lot of memorable things in The Right Stuff. But as a kid watching that movie in the theater, that's the scene I remember more than anything is the little picture of the silhouette on the little computer screen. And you see the little dots light up as the flight surgeon's watching his suit heat with all the urine that's starting to spread all through his suit. I'm sure that was not a delicious thing to get out of once he returned to the ground.
No, absolutely not. But yeah, it's like you said, this is why didn't we think about this? Well, because the flight was supposed to be an hour, not sitting here for 5.
Yeah.
And at some point he gets frustrated. And like we talked about, I'm ready to get off the airplane if the drink cart needs a new wheel. He's sitting there and all of this stuff has been going on. And at some point he gets on the radio and like, he's a hot-headed guy, right? He's a warrior, right? He's a gunnery engineer. And so he just gets on the radio and he's like, all right, NASA, why don't you fix your little problem and let's light this candle.
Yeah, let's light this candle. Yeah, his famous phrase.
So they do. And after many hours of delay, they launch him out of a nuclear missile and flies into outer space. And so he spends 15 minutes. It's a 15-minute flight. They get suborbital. They enter space. And one thing that Shepard likes to kind of say that he has over Gagarin is that when he was up there, he was piloting the aircraft, whereas Gagarin was kind of launched up and down on a trajectory. Shepard was able to control the aircraft as it was in outer space.
That's right. Yeah, and that's no disparagement on Gagarin whatsoever. But yeah, Shepard had things to do. Gagarin was like along for the ride, but Shepard actually was able to. There were times where NASA was asked, like, why do you need pilots? These guys aren't going to be flying planes. They're not going to have joysticks. And NASA defended it as like there's a lot of similarities here. Just understanding the mechanics of flight is critical to even a spacecraft, let alone an aircraft. And he kind of proved it right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm. Right. You do, in theory, you have to land this thing, right?
No. Yeah.
And so he flies, he reaches outer space, he splashes down 300 miles away and has become the first American in outer space. It must have been like very terrifying. And there's some, like we talked about, there's some non-glamorous parts about it. But when he gets back, he's kind of gone up and he's come back and he has this kind of swagger about him when he lands, and he's a national hero overnight. He's getting free Corvettes. He's getting parades. He's a national celebrity.
Meeting the president. Yeah. Ticker tape parades in Washington and New York and LA. Yeah. That must be quite the ego boost.
Oh, yeah, no kidding.
I'm also struck by, and you mentioned this, like you said, it's a 15-minute flight. He had a 15-minute flight and was picked up by the aircraft carrier 11 minutes after splashdown. Like, you're talking from the launch to being back on the ship is like less than an hour. Like, what a crazy, tiny little minuscule point of his life that was, and how much was packed into that tiny little space and time.
Right. You train you've been training for years for this, right? It's 15 minutes. And in that 15 minutes, you travel 300 miles, which is impressive.
Right. Fastest man alive at that moment.
Yes. And then he comes back and he kind of assumes a leadership role in NASA after this. He's the first man in space, which means, the way they did the early Mercury flights, the astronaut who had most recently flown would take on the capsule commander role for the next flight. So basically when Gus Grissom and when John Glenn goes up in Freedom 7, becomes the first person to orbit the Earth, first American to orbit the Earth, Shepard's on the radio with him, talking him through it, which is kind of an underappreciated component to what this guy did. He becomes the chief of the astronaut office for NASA, which means he's in charge of communicating with all like NASA communications with astronauts goes through him.
And astronaut training. Like it was a quite a large job. But I think it's important to point out that that's not the job he wanted, nor the job he expected. No. And the reason he was there is because he started having these episodes of extreme dizziness and nausea and like noises in his ears, which he kept secret because he knew it would probably get him booted from flight status. But it got so bad he had to let them know that he had this severe inner ear disorder, and it did. It grounded him, and that's how he found himself still working for NASA, still doing very important things. But of course, like so many pilots, it grounded him, and that was the last place in the world he wanted to be.
Right. Yeah, he comes down with Meniere's disease, which is an inner ear disorder. It causes vertigo, tinnitus, hearing loss, ear congestion, messes up your equilibrium.
Terrible.
That's bad for a pilot. You can't
fly with that.
And so he does get grounded, but he does some important stuff. He's the guy talking to Glenn during Friendship 7. John Glenn during that mission gets we now know erroneous error saying that his heat shield wasn't in place, and Shepard's the one who has to kind of talk him through. Hey, why don't you we need to keep the retro rocket package attached so that it will hold the heat shield in place. So he's the one kind of talking through with Glenn, being like, and these two guys know what they're talking about. And they're like, he's like, all right, this is what we got to do. You got to execute this. You got to execute this. There's the story that the NASA mission director, Chris Kraft, looks over at Shepard, who's on the radio with Glenn. And Kraft's like, everything okay? And Shepard just gives him the thumbs up, like, yep, it's all good. He's got this. Don't worry about it. Which I just like that. That's just the confidence of this guy.
It's all of them, right? There's bravado, extreme bravado with these guys. Mm-hmm. The difference between them and other people that we might mock is the fact that their actions and bravery and heroics were equal to that bravado.
Right. Yeah, they weren't. They were able to back it up.
Yeah,
makes a difference. Okay, so Alan Shepard's grounded. He's still the chief of. He's still in charge of the astronauts for NASA, but this is not what he wanted. He wanted to. The idea is not just to be the first people in space. The idea is to travel to the moon and put a person on the moon. And if he's grounded, that means he's not going into outer space anymore. He's not going to get to go on the moon. He's going to be sitting there watching Gemini train for this. He's going to sit there watching Apollo get ready for this. He's going to talk to the astronauts. He's going to walk them through it. He's going to select the astronauts for the missions, but he's not going. And I think this is probably a good time to take a break, because when we come back, this is a debilitating, incurable at the time illness, and he's somehow going to not let that stop him.
Yeah.
He's going to take some pretty extreme measures to make sure that doesn't stop him.
Sounds like him.
Yes. So we'll take a break. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back to Badass of the Week. We are here with Brandon Fibbs, and we are talking about Alan Shepard, who at this point has been guiding missions through the Gemini and the Apollo programs. He selects the Neil Armstrong team to land on the moon, and trains some of those guys and what they're going to be doing. He picks the crew for that mission, and but he wants to get back into outer space. And Brandon, he does something kind of wild to make sure that he can do that, or to attempt to do that. So instead of waiting around for some miracle or whatever. In 1968, he learns about this really experimental surgical procedure called a shunt operation that might drain the inner ear fluid that's causing his Meniere's and cure him. Now, the Navy doesn't want to approve this. And NASA doesn't like the idea that Alan Shepard, the first man in space, the head of the chief of astronauts, is going to like undergo like a secret risky surgery. And the side effects here, of like a potential failure. This is another one of these test pilot kind of things. Nobody has really done this before. And if it doesn't go right, you're looking at facial nerve damage, worsening conditions, more vertigo, complete deafness, which you couldn't even talk on the radio with Neil Armstrong if you have complete deafness. And so what does Shepard do? He arranges for the surgery. Like NASA doesn't approve this. The Navy doesn't approve it. So he goes and gets it done in secret. He goes to Los Angeles off the books and has somebody do it. And that's kind of ballsy.
It is kind of ballsy, but I guess when you've watched the entirety of the Gemini program pass you by, and you unless you do something like you said, you're never flying again, you're never going to space again, and you're certainly never going to the moon. I suppose that's a risk worth taking.
Right. And so in 1969, he's been grounded for 8 years, and that's the entirety, like most of the rest of Mercury, most of Gemini, or all of Gemini, and now Apollo 11 is like Neil Armstrong's going to land on the moon, and he's still grounded, but he gets the surgery done, and he goes back to the Navy, and he gets approved for flight status. He gets reinstated, and so I just love the idea that this guy had some incurable, debilitating illness that prevented him from flying, and even that couldn't stop him.
No. And what I find funny is then once NASA approves him and checks him out and says, okay, yeah, you're cleared to come back, he's assigned Apollo 13, which of course we all know how that ends. And of course he ended up not going on Apollo 13. There's some shifts and stuff like that. But I just find it hilarious that there was the potential for the fact that like this poor guy finally gets back to flight status, finally gets to go back to space, and then would have been on Apollo 13. He just would have been like, what is my luck?
Yeah, right. But it's even funny. It's even more, I mean, there's an interesting thing because he gets put on Apollo 14. He's 47 years old. It's been a decade since his suborbital flight. He's named the commander of Apollo 14, which would be the third moon landing.
Right.
And, we talked about watching those Mercury Redstone rockets explode. He's going to take off for Apollo 14, and it's 10 months after Apollo 13. And he worked on Apollo 13. Like he was there, like talking to the astronauts. He's in mission control on the ground when all that's happening, walking these guys through that whole disaster. And we'll do Apollo 13 at some point on the show, because that's a whole other story. But basically, it doesn't go well, and there's an emergency return to Earth, and Shepard's part of that. And now he's going to command Apollo 14, and it's one of those things like, do you feel confident that they've worked out all the kinks? It's like, it's the third moon mission, but it's still, we've only done this twice before. So we tried a third time and it failed spectacularly. We almost got everybody killed.
At what point does that become routine? Like I know that the launches, and this is something that is made very apparent, but it's also very real to history, that in the movie Apollo 13, about how like even just in 3 missions, by the third moon landing, it had gotten so kind of commonplace for the public that they were just not as interested in following it anymore. And I know that's obviously not the case for the engineers and for the people actually on board the spacecraft. There's nothing routine about this, no matter how many times you do it, but especially on only what's to be the third moon landing. There's nothing routine about that. That is a nails, white knuckle thing every step of the way. And it's going to be that way, next year when we launch, our first of the new Artemis moon missions, and it's certainly going to be the one a couple years from now when we actually land on the moon. We just get so complacent about how incredible the engineering and the people are behind these things.
Right. I do a talk. I've probably mentioned this on the show before, but I do a talk for schools about the space program. Or I did this space book with my friend Eric, and do presentations on it at schools. And I'll show a picture of as part of the PowerPoint, I'll show a picture of like Candy Crush, and I'll be like, that always gets a reaction from the crowd because the kids recognize it, and I'm like, so the combined computing power aboard Apollo 11
yes,
not only couldn't run Candy Crush, but could not render this image.
Yes. Yes. It's extraordinary. And yet we did it. And yet they did it.
Mm-hmm. Using a slide rule. Not even a computer. They didn't use generative AI to figure out how to target the moon.
I wouldn't know where to start. That's not my brain. But I'm so glad that there are people. We always talk about the fact that we got to the moon on baling wire and duct tape. And in some ways we did. But oh my God, that makes the achievement all the more incredible in my eyes. Yes.
And so he does get on to Apollo 14. He takes off with a couple guys who are on their first space mission. He's the only of the original Mercury 7 that's going to go to the moon.
Yeah.
And they fly out there. Takes quite a while to get out there, and then they begin their descent onto the lunar surface. And Alan Shepard starts getting, as he's at the controls of the lunar lander, and we've talked about this in the Neil Armstrong episode, and something similar happens to Alan Shepard here. Starts getting error messages.
Yeah, starts getting error messages and possibly having to abort. And it's a very similar situation. And like that story is solved by some incredible minds back in mission control who figure it out. But that almost had an aborted mission, or possibly even something worse, on Apollo 14.
Right. And so he's there. It's 15 minutes before he's supposed to touch on the surface. He's at the controls of the Antares, the lunar module for Apollo 14. And he starts getting these, it's an auto message like, hey, something's wrong. The lander was going to automatically abort the mission. And he's like, no, I don't think it's messed up. I think everything's okay. And so they had to kind of manually override. It was like a pretty complicated software fix, but they had to manually override the command in order to allow him to land the aircraft or the spacecraft, which he does. The
similarities with Armstrong on 11 are uncanny.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so he and pilot Edgar Mitchell, they land on the moon, and they get out and they spend 9 hours walking around, and they're exploring Cone Crater. And Alan Shepard at this point, he's already done it. He's an original Mercury guy. He's first guy in space. Now he's landed on the surface of the moon, and he's like, how can I make this more dramatic? How can I really, the public doesn't care about this, but I'll give him something to care about. And so Brandon, he does something that I think is awesome.
Yes. I assume you're referring to the golf balls?
I'm referring to the golf balls, yes.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, he got that idea from Bob Hope, he later said. And he smuggled a 6-iron head, attached it to one of their sampling tools, and became the first person to hit not one, but 2 golf balls on the lunar surface.
Yes, he drops the golf ball. He smuggled it in his gear. And so, you said Bob Hope gave him the idea, and he was just like, they asked him, and he was like, I just saw people landing on the moon. And I thought, what a neat place to whack a golf ball.
He's not wrong. I mean, as silly as that was, and he even said, I waited to do it until the very end after we'd done all of our work, because if it went wrong, I didn't want something to, I didn't want to break something, but if you think about it, even that is a beautiful little physics experiment about how a ball moves in such low lunar gravity and stuff like that.
Sure.
So I'm sure, on some level, some teacher after that happened was like, ooh, this is something I can talk about in class tomorrow.
Definitely. Yeah, he got a custom 6-iron head. He pitched the idea originally to the director of the Manned Space Flight Center, Bob Gilruth, and Gilruth was like, no way, absolutely not. Apollo's already under a little bit of pressure. It needs to be, what science are we getting out of this? It's going to make it look silly. And so Shepard once again went outside the bounds of the Navy and NASA. He had that golf head, that 6-iron head, constructed specially. And the golf balls, he smuggled them in to outer space in his spacesuit, but he was very clear to be like, I bought this. This is no extra expense to the taxpayer. I paid for this. I'm going to smuggle it on board a spaceship. and hit golf balls on the moon. He's the only person to ever play a sport on another celestial object.
That's right. That's right. And as you said, he was the oldest person and remains, I believe, the oldest person ever to walk on the moon at 47.
Yes. He gets he meets the president again. The public, turns out, they loved it. They thought it was hilarious that he hit golf balls on the moon. Why wouldn't you? And the the 6-iron head is in the U.S. Golf Association Golf Museum. Now it's on display. You can go see
that's awesome. They recovered them? That I didn't know.
The head. The
head. Okay, yeah.
The balls are gone, I think.
Yeah, there are still 2 balls sitting up there somewhere.
Yes. Yeah, he hit it. He would say it goes miles and miles and miles.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was like, there's no way.
They said it went about 200 yards. Like somebody did some science on this, and they're like, I probably went about 200 yards, which is still really good for a 6-iron.
One of my favorite facts that I learned when I was making the 9 Days in July podcast about the Apollo 11 mission is the fact that the lunar dust that was blasted from just beneath the lander, when the Eagle landed, all of that lunar dust that was being blasted by that engine, made it halfway around the moon, because the gravity was so low and the power of that engine as it descended was so high that it just, and the very first thing that they did when they cut off the engine is they were talking about, oh my God, look at that. You can just see everything scattering and flying off in every direction through their windows. But yeah, halfway around the moon.
That's amazing. And so that's it. So Alan Shepard gets to go on the moon, and he comes back, and then he goes back to being the chief of the astronaut office. He holds that position until 1971, 69 to 71, and then again from later. He takes a little break in 71, and then he's there until he retires in 74. He's responsible for managing the astronaut corps, overseeing their training. He provides pilot input for the design and planning of the remaining Apollo missions. He retires in 1974 as a rear admiral, which he's the first astronaut to reach that high rank. He retires in 1974 with a career 216 hours of flight time on the log. So, not bad.
Not bad.
Then, he goes back to, he gets into the private sector. He has, becomes a successful businessman. He gets into supporting education in science and engineering. So he's the founder of the Mercury 7 Foundation, which is now called the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. It's a nonprofit that gives scholarships to college students who are pursuing technical degrees. He passes away in July 1998 at the age of 74. And him and his wife of 53 years, she passes away like 5 weeks after him. So they have their ashes combined, and together they're scattered over Pebble Beach, California, which makes sense because
I thought that was amazing. I know it's a sort of morbid thing, but I've always find it lovely when couples die within just a few days or weeks of each other. It just kind of like hey, I'm not willing to keep doing this without him. I'm ready to go too. I found that beautiful. I love the fact that she had this, whole plan to scatter his ashes, and then she dies from a heart attack after he dies from leukemia. And then, like you said, their families combine their ashes and spread them over the seas of the waters of Florida where they lived. It's beautiful.
Right. Yeah. And it just, I liked that a lot. It made me happy. And so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So what's the story? What's the lesson that we learned from Alan Shepard here? We've got a war hero, World War II destroyer, gunnery commander. He becomes an original test pilot, original Mercury 7, first man into outer space for the United States. He risks his life and his career to get this experimental surgery off the books in order to return to space, and becomes the only member of the Mercury 7 to land on the moon. And when he does it, he still has the I don't know, the audacity, I guess, to hit golf balls while he's up there. So what do we take away from this guy's story?
You know what? I'm going to let his biographer speak for him. So Neil Thompson, who was one of his biographers, wrote a paragraph that I thought encapsulated it perfectly. And it even hints at the things where, we were talking about, that he had an icy, bristly personality. They interviewed several of his fellow astronauts, and the guy's an asshole. But everyone still admired the hell out of him, despite that personality. You know, despite the fact that he had this amazing relationship with his wife, even when he was in the Navy, he called her every single day at 5 o'clock, and just had this like long-standing thing together. And she died, by the way, at exactly like 5 o'clock in the evening,
really?
At the exact same time that they always used to call. So Neil was kind of wrestling with this, like, you know, here's this man who did these amazing things, but he was also kind of personally kind of prickly and nobody really liked him. And his quote was, "In many ways, and despite his darker personality traits, Shepard was the best of the best. Here was a guy who fought an evil empire in World War II, landed planes on aircraft carriers during storms at night, bailed out of test jets 10 miles above the earth, downed cocktails or swatted golf balls with celebrities, water skied barefoot, raced Corvettes, slept with beautiful women, and became a millionaire. All the things boys and teens want to do when they become men. Shepard was a man's man, and other astronauts through the 1960s strived to be just like him, even if they didn't necessarily like him."
I like it.
That's a good, I mean, for me, like that encapsulates it.
That does. That kind of sums him up. And, you know, that's badass.
That's badass.
Yeah, he never quit. He never quit. And, you know, you have that mentality of, I think about like pitchers in baseball. They're just like, in order to be a successful pitcher, you need to get up there and you need to be confident that you can get every batter out, you know, and that doesn't necessarily make you a likable person on a personal level, because you have to have that mentality of like, I'm going to get you, right? Like, and, you know, sometimes that's off-putting, but sometimes that also can lead to successful outcomes, especially if, like you said, you can back it up. Okay,
if
Brandon,
you made it onto Ben's podcast, obviously you did something right.
Did something right. Yeah, that's right. We should all be so lucky. Okay, well, Brandon, that's all the time we have for today. That's Alan Shepard, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on and telling us the story. And
thank you for having me on.
So, Brandon, what are you up to these days? You've had some kind of interesting space-related movement in your life.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I have. If anyone listening has remembered previous conversations we've had, I've been in the entertainment industry for the last several decades. As you alluded to at the top of the show, I'm no longer doing that. Hollywood's in a state of drastic and violent contraction, and the jobs just evaporated, and I needed to do something new. And I have found the best possible new job ever, and I am running communications for a company called Space for Humanity. And Space for Humanity finds really exceptional people, educators, activists, people who would otherwise never be able to fly in space. And we literally put them on Blue Origin rockets and launch them into space. And that's not the point. The point is actually once they get back to Earth, they become these STEM evangelists. And we send them out for to speak to children and to conferences and to all kinds of things, conventions, basically just talking about how experiencing the overview effect, seeing the fragile Earth from space, how that changes everyone who has that sensation, and how they can communicate what that was like to people so that we can kind of change our planet, so that we can say, hey, guys, it's a fragile planet. We need to take care of it, and we need to take care of each other because there are no borders from space. So, yeah, I've landed in an exceptional job.
That's amazing. That's great. So congratulations, Brandon. That's really exciting. And you're still working on podcast stuff. You're still working on some other projects. You're still doing your TikTok.
Yeah, the Wiki Surfer podcast will be coming back in 2026. And the TikTok channel, Stay Curious, my friends, literally just restarted today, which is October 27th, the time of this recording. And I'm coming back with new daily science and history stories every single day.
Excellent. Where can people find that?
That's on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram.
All right, great. Well, Brandon Fibbs, thank you for joining us. That's Brandon, and that's the story of Alan Shepard, I feel like underappreciated space badass.
Underappreciated no longer.
Yes, ideally. Okay, thank you guys so much for listening. We always love having you here to listen to our stories, and we hope to see you again on the next episode. Until then, stay badass. Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content and $7 Productions. Executive producers are Dwayne Johnson, Danny Garcia, Andrew Jacobs, Hiram Garcia, Brian Gewirtz, Frankie Chaparino, and of course, me, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and my semi-regular but always awesome co-host, Dr. Patricia Larish. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Our mixing, music, and sound design is done by the incomparable Jude Brewer. Production support by Jean McGale-Waite. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, tell your friends, and tell your enemies. And please leave us a review. If you want to support Badass of the Week, please check out our Patreon page. We'll be back next week with another one.